Picture this. Your own son telling you to get out of his workplace because he's too busy with an important client. Now imagine his face when his boss walks up and says, "She is the important client." That's exactly what happened to me at Goldman Sachs. My son Rob had been lecturing me about money for months, bragging about his prestigious finance job, treating me like some confused old woman who couldn't balance a checkbook. What he didn't know was that I'd been a VIP client at his firm for over 15 years, with more money in my portfolio than he'd see in a lifetime. I'm Ruth Miller. I'm 69 years old, and I live in Chicago. The day my son publicly humiliated me at his own workplace was the day he discovered exactly who he'd been disrespecting all along. It was a Tuesday morning when I walked into the sleek Goldman Sachs office building in downtown Chicago. The marble floors gleamed under those bright lights, and everything felt so formal and intimidating. I was nervous, I'll admit that. You see, I'd been avoiding this meeting for months, and now I couldn't put it off any longer. As I approached the reception area, I spotted my son Rob near the elevators, talking to some colleagues in his crisp navy suit. He looked so confident, so important. My heart sank because this was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. The moment Rob saw me, his face changed, not happiness to see his mother, but irritation, pure irritation. "Mom!" he called out, loudly enough for his colleagues to hear. "What are you doing here? I'm busy with an important client meeting. You need to leave." The dismissive tone in his voice, the way he waved me away like I was some confused old woman who'd wandered into the wrong building, my cheeks burned with embarrassment as his colleagues stared. But then Charles Wilson, Rob's boss, appeared beside us. A distinguished man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Rob," Charles said slowly, his voice carrying a note of confusion and concern, "she is the important client I'm meeting with." The silence that followed was deafening. Rob's mouth actually fell open. His colleagues exchanged glances, and I watched my son's face go from confident dismissal to complete shock in about 3 seconds. "What?" Rob whispered. But to understand how we got to this moment, how my own son could treat me with such disrespect while having no idea who he was really dealing with, I need to tell you about the past few months. Because you see, my son had no idea who he was really working for. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories like mine. Let me take you back to how this all started, because my family had no idea who they were really dealing with. My name is Ruth Miller. I'm 69 years old, and I live in the same modest ranch house in Oak Park, Illinois that my husband Frank and I bought 32 years ago. From the outside, you'd never guess what my bank statements look like. I drive a reliable Honda Civic that's 7 years old. I shop sales at the grocery store, and I haven't redecorated since the Clinton administration. My neighbors probably think I'm living on Social Security and a small pension. That's exactly what I want them to think. You see, I learned a long time ago that showing off wealth only brings problems. My late husband Frank always said, "Ruth, the best way to keep your money is to live like you don't have any." He was a smart man, my Frank. He built a successful plumbing supply business here in Chicago, and when he passed away 8 years ago, I inherited everything. But instead of spending it all or letting it sit in some basic savings account, I decided to learn about investing. I started reading financial books, studying market trends, and yes, I opened an account with Goldman Sachs. Not because of their fancy reputation, but because they had the expertise I needed to grow Frank's legacy. Over the past 15 years, I've built a portfolio worth over $8 million. I meet quarterly with my advisor Charles Wilson, and I've consistently earned returns that would make most professional investors jealous. But here's the thing. I kept it all secret from my family, especially from my son Rob. Why would a mother hide her success from her own child? Because I knew Rob's personality. Even as a young man, he was always impressed by status, always trying to be the smartest person in the room. If he'd known about my wealth back then, it would have made his arrogance 10 times worse. So I made a choice to protect him from his own character flaws by keeping my financial success private. My family sees my simple lifestyle and assumes I'm scraping by on Frank's small pension and Social Security. When Rob's car broke down last year, I quietly helped with the repair bill, letting him think I was stretching my limited budget to help my son. When my daughter-in-law Amanda mentioned they were struggling with their mortgage, I anonymously sent them money through their bank, making it look like an accounting error in their favor. I've been the invisible safety net for my family while they assumed I was the one who needed help. Then, 4 months ago, everything changed. Rob got hired at Goldman Sachs in their wealth management division. He was over the moon, calling me immediately to share the news. "Mom, you'll never believe it," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "I got the job at Goldman Sachs. Your son is working for one of the most prestigious investment firms in the world." I was genuinely happy for him. Rob had always been ambitious, and this was a great opportunity. But what happened next broke my heart little by little. Within his first week, Rob started explaining to me how investment firms like Goldman Sachs worked, as if I'd never heard of the stock market. He'd come over for dinner and spend the entire evening lecturing me about basic financial concepts, while I nodded politely and asked simple questions to make him feel important. "Mom, you really should understand how compound interest works," he'd say, using the same tone you'd use with a child. "It's never too late to learn about money management." I bit my tongue and smiled. My own son, who'd been working at Goldman Sachs for 3 weeks, was explaining compound interest to a woman who'd been earning compound returns on a multi-million-dollar portfolio for over a decade. But I loved him, so I protected him from the truth. I figured his job would give him confidence, and maybe that was worth enduring a few condescending conversations about finance. After all, how much harm could a little workplace pride really do? I had no idea that my kindness was about to backfire in the most humiliating way possible. What started as harmless workplace excitement quickly turned into something that made my stomach churn every time Rob walked through my front door. By his second month at Goldman Sachs, Rob's attitude toward me had completely changed. The son who used to ask for my advice on everything now treated me like I was mentally declining. Every conversation became a lecture. Every family dinner turned into financial education with Professor Rob. "Mom, I've been thinking," he announced one Sunday evening, cutting into his pot roast like he was delivering a corporate presentation. "Now that I understand how these big investment firms work, I really think we need to talk about your finances." My daughter-in-law Amanda nodded enthusiastically from across the table. "Rob's learned so much already. Did you know Goldman Sachs manages billions of dollars for wealthy clients?" I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. "Is that so?" "Oh yes," Rob continued, warming to his favorite topic. "These firms have minimum investments of hundreds of thousands of dollars. They only work with really sophisticated investors who understand complex financial strategies." Amanda chimed in. "It's probably hard for you to imagine that kind of money, Mom Miller. But Rob's seeing it every day now." The condescension in her voice made my cheeks burn. Here was my daughter-in-law, who I'd secretly helped with her mortgage payments, talking to me like I was some confused grandmother who kept her life savings in a coffee can. But Rob wasn't finished educating me. "The thing is, Mom, people your age often don't understand how inflation works. That little nest egg you and Dad saved up? It's probably losing value every year just sitting in whatever basic savings account you have." I set down my fork carefully. "And what would you suggest?" Rob's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Well, now that I have connections at Goldman Sachs, I could probably get you a meeting with one of their junior advisors. Nothing too complicated, just someone who could help you understand basic investment principles." The irony was so thick I could have served it for dessert. My son wanted to use his 3-month career at Goldman Sachs to get me a meeting with a junior advisor at the firm where I'd been a VIP client for 15 years. "That's very thoughtful," I managed to say. "I mean, it's the least I can do," Rob said magnanimously. "I know money stuff can be confusing for people who've never had to deal with it professionally." Amanda reached over and patted my hand like I was a sweet but simple child. "Rob's always looking out for family. We're so lucky he's finally in a position to help with these complicated things." By month 3, Rob's financial lectures had become a weekly torture session. He'd arrive at my house every Sunday with some new piece of wisdom he'd learned at work. "Mom, I found out about something called diversifications this week," he announced. settling into Frank's old recliner like he owned the place. It means you shouldn't put all your money in one place. Revolutionary concept, right? I was folding laundry while he spoke, thinking about my carefully balanced portfolio of domestic stocks, international funds, bonds, real estate investments, and alternative assets that Charles Wilson and I had spent years perfecting. Fascinating, I said. I bet you never heard of index funds either, Rob continued. They're these amazing investments that track the whole stock market. Goldman Sachs recommends them for beginners who don't understand individual stock selection. Every word felt like a pinprick. Here was my son, explaining index funds to a woman whose portfolio had consistently outperformed the market for over a decade through strategic stock picking and sector rotation. The worst part wasn't even Rob's condescension. It was watching Amanda use his job to establish herself as the family financial expert. At my granddaughter Madison's birthday party, I overheard Amanda talking to the other parents. It's such a relief that Rob finally has a career where he can help his mother with money decisions, she was saying. The poor woman has been completely lost since her husband died. She doesn't understand anything about modern finance. Another mother asked. That must be difficult for her. Oh, it is. Amanda sighed dramatically. Rob keeps trying to explain basic concepts to her, but you know how elderly people can be with learning new things. At least now he has the professional knowledge to guide her properly. I was standing 10 feet away, serving cake to children, listening to my daughter-in-law describe me like I was suffering from dementia. The woman I'd secretly helped avoid foreclosure was telling people I was too mentally feeble to understand money. By the 4th month, Rob had appointed himself as my unofficial financial guardian. I've been thinking, Mom, he said during one of our Sunday dinners, maybe I should take a look at your financial situation, just to make sure everything's organized properly. What do you mean? Well, I could review your bank statements, see how much you have in savings, maybe help you set up a simple budget. Nothing fancy, just basic financial hygiene for someone your age. Amanda nodded approvingly. Rob's become so knowledgeable about these things. And honestly, Mom Miller, it would give us all peace of mind to know your finances are being handled properly. The phrase someone your age hit me like a slap. My own family was treating me like I was incompetent because of a number. They had no idea that someone my age had been successfully managing millions of dollars while they were struggling to handle their own household budget. I appreciate the offer, I said quietly. Great. I'll bring some paperwork next week, and we can get started organizing everything properly. That night, after they left, I sat in my living room staring at the family photos on my mantle. Pictures of Rob's college graduation that I'd paid for. Photos from their wedding, where I'd quietly covered half the expenses. Christmas mornings where my modest gifts had actually cost more than their mortgage payment. I'd spent months protecting my son from his own arrogance by hiding my success, and he'd repaid my kindness by treating me like a financial invalid. Every lecture about basic investing was delivered to a woman who could buy his house with pocket change. Every condescending explanation of compound interest was given to someone whose returns had been compounding for longer than he'd been working. But what really broke my heart was the realization that my protection had backfired. Instead of saving Rob from the worst parts of his personality, I'd actually enabled them. By hiding my competence, I'd given him permission to treat me as incompetent. The next week, I received a call that would change everything. Mrs. Miller, this is Charles Wilson from Goldman Sachs. I hope you're well. I was calling to schedule your quarterly portfolio review. We have some important market developments to discuss, and there are several time-sensitive decisions that need your attention. I looked at my calendar and my heart sank. My usual meeting times would put me right in the middle of Rob's workday. For months I'd been scheduling around his hours to avoid any chance of running into him at the office. Charles, could we possibly meet in the evening? Or perhaps on a weekend? I'm afraid not, Mrs. Miller. These decisions really can't wait, and I'm only available during regular business hours for the next several weeks due to travel schedules. I closed my eyes and felt the walls closing in. My months of careful avoidance were about to come to an end. All right, I said quietly. Let's schedule it for Tuesday morning. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my choice to protect Rob from the truth was about to collide headfirst with his choice to disrespect me. And I had no idea which one of us would survive the impact. What happened next shattered my heart in ways I never thought possible. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals come from the people you've sacrificed the most to protect. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd driven over to Rob and Amanda's house on a Saturday afternoon to drop off some groceries. I have a key, and they'd told me to just let myself in since they were expecting me. But as I approached their kitchen with bags in hand, I heard Rob's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone, laughing. No, you don't understand how clueless she is, he was saying. My mom thinks Goldman Sachs is like some mystical place where only geniuses work. She gets this amazed look on her face whenever I mention my job, like I just told her I work for NASA or something. I froze in the kitchen doorway, groceries still in my arms. Yeah, she has zero understanding of finance, Rob continued. Yesterday she asked me what a mutual fund was. Can you believe that? A mutual fund. I had to explain it like she was in kindergarten. The person on the other end must have said something funny, because Rob burst into laughter. Oh, it gets better. She keeps all her money in some ancient savings account that probably earns like 0.5% interest. I keep trying to explain inflation to her, but you know how old people are with math. It just doesn't compute. My hands started shaking. The groceries felt impossibly heavy. The funny thing is, she's so impressed by my job that she'll probably let me handle all her finances soon. Which is good, because honestly, someone needs to manage her money before she makes some terrible mistake. At her age, she can't afford to lose what little she has. I set the groceries down on their counter as quietly as possible and backed toward the door. But Rob wasn't finished. Amanda and I were talking about it last night. We think my mom might have early-stage dementia or something. The way she just nods along when I explain basic financial concepts, like she's never heard of compound interest before. It's actually kind of sad. Dementia. My own son thought I had dementia because I was polite enough to listen to his lectures without correcting him. I made it to my car before the tears started. But that was just the beginning. The following week brought a family dinner that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Rob had invited his brother Kevin and sister-in-law Lisa over, along with Tyler and Madison. It was supposed to be a celebration of Rob's 4-month work anniversary at Goldman Sachs. Amanda had made a cake and everything. So tell them about your promotion prospects, Amanda prompted Rob as we ate dessert. Rob puffed up with pride. Well, my supervisor says I'm really grasping the complex financial strategies faster than most new hires. In fact, he mentioned that I might be ready to start handling some client relationships soon. That's wonderful, honey, I said. Thanks, Mom. And actually, that reminds me of something important we need to discuss as a family. Rob stood up like he was giving a corporate presentation. Kevin and Lisa turned their attention to him expectantly. As you all know, Mom has been struggling financially since Dad passed away. She's been trying to manage her finances on her own. But frankly, she doesn't have the knowledge or experience to make good decisions with money. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Now that I have professional expertise in wealth management, I think it's time for me to take a more active role in helping Mom with her financial planning. Amanda nodded enthusiastically. Rob's learned so much about investment strategies and portfolio management. It would be such a relief to know someone qualified is looking after Mom Miller's future. Kevin leaned forward. What exactly are you thinking? Well, Rob said, settling back into his chair like a CEO addressing his board. I'm proposing that Mom give me financial power of attorney. That way, I can make sure her money is being invested properly, ensure she's not vulnerable to scams, and basically provide the professional oversight that someone her age needs. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Lisa spoke first. That sounds very responsible, Rob. I think so too, Rob replied. The truth is, Mom's generation just doesn't understand modern finance. They grew up putting money in savings accounts, and thinking that was enough. But inflation has been eating away at her nest egg for years, and she doesn't even realize it. Tyler, my 17-year-old grandson, looked up from his phone. Grandma, you should totally let Dad help you. He knows everything about money now. Madison, who's 15, added. Yeah, Grandma. Dad could probably make you rich. The innocent cruelty of children who had no idea their grandmother could buy their college educations without blinking. But Amanda wasn't finished with the humiliation. The thing is, Mom Miller, we're all worried about you. You're living in that big house all alone, trying to manage finances that are probably too complicated for someone who's never had to deal with investments before. What if something happened to you? What if you forgot to pay a bill, or got confused about your accounts? My voice, when I finally found it, was barely a whisper. I'm managing fine. Rob reached across the table and patted my hand in the most condescending way possible. I know you think you are, Mom, but there's a difference between getting by and actually making smart financial decisions. For instance, do you even know what your annual rate of return is on your savings? See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. You don't even know the basic metrics that determine whether your money is working for you or against you. Kevin jumped in supportively. Rob, I think this is really generous of you. Mom could definitely benefit from professional guidance. Absolutely, Lisa agreed. Financial planning is so complex these days. It's wonderful that Rob has the expertise to help family. The conversation continued around me like I wasn't even there. My own children discussing my mental capacity, my financial competence, my future, as if I was already too far gone to participate in decisions about my own life. But the worst moment came when Amanda stood up to clear the dessert plates. You know what the really sad part is? She said to the group. As if I was deaf as well as incompetent. Mom Miller was actually pretty sharp when Frank was alive. But ever since he died, it's like she just gave up trying to understand things. She's become completely dependent on other people to explain the world to her. Rob nodded sagely. It's actually pretty common. When people get to a certain age, especially women who never had to handle finances during their marriages, they just sort of shut down mentally. They stop learning new things. The important thing, Lisa added, is that she has family who care enough to step in before she makes any serious mistakes. I excused myself to use the bathroom and stood in front of their mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me had been successfully managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio for 15 years. She had consistently outperformed market averages through careful research and strategic thinking. She had built wealth that her family couldn't even imagine. And her own children thought she was losing her mind. When I returned to the dining room, Rob was showing everyone some papers he'd printed out. I already had our family lawyer draw up the basic documents, he announced proudly. All Mom needs to do is sign here, here and here. And I'll be able to start managing her finances properly. He slid the power of attorney documents across the table to me like he was doing me the favor of a lifetime. Don't worry about reading all the legal language, Mom. I can explain what everything means. I stared down at the papers that would give my son complete control over my financial life. The same son who thought I had dementia because I was too polite to embarrass him with my superior knowledge. I need some time to think about this, I said quietly. Rob's face fell slightly. Mom, there's really nothing to think about. This is clearly the best option for your future security. Your father and I always discussed major decisions together, I said. I don't make quick choices about important matters. Amanda's expression turned sharp. But Mom Miller, Frank's been gone for 8 years. You can't keep using him as an excuse to avoid making necessary decisions. The cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow, using my beloved husband as an excuse. I just need a few days, I repeated. Rob sighed, like I was being unreasonably difficult. Fine. But honestly, Mom, I don't understand why you're hesitating. Do you really think you're qualified to make better financial decisions than someone who works at Goldman Sachs professionally? That question hung in the air like a challenge. And for the first time in months, I felt a spark of anger instead of just hurt. I'll let you know my decision soon, I said, standing up from the table. As I gathered my purse and coat, I heard Amanda whisper to Lisa, I hope she doesn't wait too long. The longer she delays, the more damage she could do to her own financial future. I drove home in a haze of heartbreak and fury. My family had spent the evening discussing my incompetence, my mental decline, my need for supervision, while sitting around a dinner table in a house that I'd secretly helped them afford. The power of attorney papers sat in my purse like a ticking bomb. Rob expected me to sign away my financial independence to a man who'd been working in wealth management for 4 months and thought I didn't know what a mutual fund was. That night, I called Charles Wilson at home. Charles, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Mrs. Miller. What's on your mind? In your professional opinion, how would you rate my financial knowledge and decision-making ability? There was a pause. Ruth, you're one of the most sophisticated investors I work with. Your understanding of market dynamics, your strategic thinking, your risk management. Honestly, you could probably teach courses on wealth management. Why are you asking? I told him everything. About Rob's job, about the lectures, about the power of attorney documents, about my family's conviction that I was mentally declining. When I finished, Charles was quiet for a long moment. Ruth, he said finally, your son has been working at Goldman Sachs for 4 months. You've been my client for 15 years. Your portfolio has consistently outperformed our benchmarks. You understand complex financial instruments that most people never even hear about. The idea that you need financial supervision is not just wrong, it's absurd. But what if they're right? What if I'm fooling myself about my own competence? Ruth, last quarter you identified a market opportunity in emerging technology funds that earned you a 15% return, when the overall market was flat. You understood the risks, you did your research, and you made a decision that most professional investors would have been afraid to make. Does that sound like someone who needs a financial guardian? After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with Rob's power of attorney papers spread out in front of me. My son wanted legal authority to manage the financial life of a woman whose investment expertise exceeded his own by decades. The cruelest part wasn't even the condescension. It was the realization that my kindness had created this monster. By protecting Rob from the truth about my success, I'd given him permission to believe I was a failure. By hiding my competence, I'd enabled his assumption of my incompetence. But I wasn't ready to reveal my secret yet. I still hoped that somehow we could get through this without destroying our relationship entirely. I had no idea that the choice was about to be taken out of my hands completely. The phone call that would change everything came on a Monday morning while I was still trying to figure out how to handle Rob's power of attorney demands. Mrs. Miller, this is Charles Wilson. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Charles. How can I help you? Well, I'm afraid we have some urgent matters that require your immediate attention. The Fed just announced an unexpected rate change, and there are some significant market movements that could affect your portfolio positioning. We really need to meet this week to discuss rebalancing strategies. My heart sank. For the past 4 months, ever since Rob started working at Goldman Sachs, I'd been carefully scheduling my quarterly meetings during his lunch breaks or late in the afternoon, when he was more likely to be in client meetings himself. It had been a delicate dance of avoidance. Charles, could we possibly meet on Saturday? Or perhaps early in the morning before 8? I'm afraid not, Mrs. Miller. I'm leaving for a client conference in London on Thursday. And I won't be back for 3 weeks. With these market conditions, waiting that long could cost you significant returns. We really need to meet Tuesday or Wednesday during regular business hours. I closed my eyes and felt my carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Is there any way we could handle this over the phone? Ruth, we're talking about potentially moving several $1 million between asset classes based on changing economic indicators. This requires in-person discussion with documents, charts, and detailed analysis. I wouldn't feel comfortable making these recommendations without sitting down with you properly. Several $1 million. The phrase that my family couldn't even imagine was just another Tuesday morning for Charles and me. I understand, I said quietly. It's just that, well, my son works there now, and I've been trying to avoid any awkward encounters. Oh, that's right. Rob Miller in our wealth management division. Nice young man, very eager to learn. Don't worry about running into him. I'll make sure we have complete privacy for our meeting. If only it were that simple. All right. I agreed reluctantly. What time works best for you? How about Tuesday at 10:30? That should give us plenty of time to review everything thoroughly. After I hung up, I spent the rest of Monday in a state of nervous anxiety. I'd managed to avoid this exact scenario for 4 months, but now market forces were conspiring against my careful planning. That evening, Rob called with his usual weekly check-in. Hey Mom, just wanted to remind you that those financial documents are still waiting for your signature. You know the power of attorney papers we discussed? The papers were still sitting on my kitchen counter, unsigned. I'm still thinking about it, honey. Mom, there's really nothing to think about. Every day you delay is another day your money sits there earning practically nothing. I could have you set up with proper investments by the end of the week. The irony of my son lecturing me about proper investments on the same day my advisor called about repositioning millions was almost unbearable. I know you mean well, Rob. It's not about meaning well anymore, Mom. Amanda and I had a long talk last night, and we're genuinely concerned about your mental state. These financial decisions are getting too complicated for someone your age to handle alone. What makes you think I can't handle them? Come on, Mom. Yesterday when I was explaining tax loss harvesting, you just stared at me like you'd never heard the term before. I had stared at him because I'd been trying to figure out how to politely tell my son that I'd been using tax loss harvesting strategies for over a decade to minimize my portfolio's tax burden. Rob, I promise I'll make a decision soon. How soon? Because honestly, watching you struggle with these concepts is painful. What if you make some terrible mistake that wipes out your savings? Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed in my best navy suit and drove downtown with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The Goldman Sachs building loomed ahead like a monument to my months of deception. I made it through security, up to the 42nd floor, and into Charles's office without incident. For an hour, we discussed complex rebalancing strategies, analyzed emerging market opportunities, and made decisions involving millions of dollars. I felt competent, respected, intellectually challenged in the best possible way. Your instincts about the technology sector continue to be remarkable, Charles was saying as we reviewed portfolio performance. That position you suggested last quarter earned a 22% return. I'd been watching the federal contract patterns, I explained. The writing was on the wall for anyone paying attention. Exactly. That kind of forward thinking is what separates successful long-term investors from the crowd. We had just finished signing the rebalancing documents when Charles glanced at his watch. Ruth, I'm terribly sorry, but I need to step out for about 5 minutes. There's an urgent call from our London office that I absolutely cannot delay. Will you be comfortable waiting here? Of course. Take your time. I'll be right back. Help yourself to coffee if you'd like. Charles gathered some files and headed toward the door. Oh, and don't worry about anyone disturbing you. I'll let my assistant know I'm in an important client meeting. As the door closed behind him, I settled back in my chair and reviewed the documents we'd completed. In just over an hour, I'd made sophisticated financial decisions that demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking my family insisted I lacked. I was feeling more confident than I had in months when I heard voices in the hallway. Male voices, getting closer. My blood ran cold as I recognized one of them. So the client meeting went really well, Rob was saying. I think I'm finally getting the hang of these more complex accounts. Excellent progress, Rob. Another voice replied. Your enthusiasm is really showing in your work quality. They were getting closer to Charles's office. I looked around frantically. Could I hide behind the desk? Under the conference table? But where could a 69-year-old woman possibly hide in a glass-walled executive office? I have another client meeting in 15 minutes, Rob continued. So I just need to grab those portfolio analysis reports from Mr. Wilson's office. My heart stopped. They were coming to Charles's office. The door opened, and there was my son mid-conversation with a senior colleague, stopping dead when he saw me sitting in Charles Wilson's chair. Mom? Rob's voice cracked with shock and embarrassment. What are you doing here? You can't just wander around Goldman Sachs like this. His colleague, a distinguished man in his 50s, looked between us with obvious confusion. This is your mother, Rob? Rob's face was turning red. Yes, and I'm so sorry about this. Mom, you need to leave immediately. I'm working. This is a professional environment, not a place for family visits. The harshness in his voice. The way he was dismissing me in front of his colleague like I was some confused old woman who'd wandered into the wrong building. It cut me to the bone. Rob, I said quietly. I'm not here for a family visit. Then why are you in Mr. Wilson's office? Did you get lost? How did you even get past security? I'm not lost, honey. Mom, I'm busy with important client meetings. You cannot just show up at my workplace like this. You need to leave right now before you embarrass both of us even more. The dismissive tone, the assumption that I was embarrassing him, the way he was waving me toward the door like I was some unwelcome intrusion, every word felt like a slap. His colleague was staring now, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing Rob's treatment of his own mother. Rob, I tried again. I have every right to be here. No, you don't. This is the executive floor. They don't let random visitors wander around up here. Security should have stopped you. I'm not a random visitor. Mom, please. I'm trying to build a professional reputation here. I can't have my elderly mother wandering around the office looking confused and lost. Just then, Charles Wilson's voice carried down the hallway as he returned from his call. Mrs. Miller. I'm so sorry about that delay. Where were we with your portfolio rebalancing? Charles appeared in the doorway and stopped short when he saw Rob and his colleagues standing there. Oh, Rob. Hello. I didn't expect to see you up here today. Rob looked from Charles to me and back to Charles, his confusion deepening. Mr. Wilson. I'm so sorry about this. My mother somehow got past security, and I was just escorting her out. I know she's bothering you during important client meetings. Charles's eyebrows rose slowly as he looked at Rob. Bothering me? Charles repeated carefully. Yes, sir. I know you have that important VIP client meeting, and I'm sorry my mother interrupted it. Sometimes elderly people get confused about where they're supposed to be. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles looked at Rob with an expression that was part shock, part disbelief. Rob, he said slowly, his voice carrying a note of professional disapproval. Mrs. Miller isn't interrupting my VIP client meeting. She is the VIP client meeting. The color drained from Rob's face so fast, I thought he might faint. What? He whispered. Your mother, Rob, is the important client I've been meeting with for the past hour. She's one of our most valued VIP clients. Rob's colleague's mouth fell open slightly. That's impossible, Rob stammered. I assure you it's quite possible, Charles said, his tone now distinctly cool. Mrs. Miller has been our client for 15 years. And Rob, I have to say, I'm quite shocked by the way you just spoke to her. The horror on Rob's face was complete. He'd just told his own mother to leave Goldman Sachs because he was too busy with important clients, and she was the important client. I don't understand, Rob whispered. Charles looked at him with the kind of professional disappointment that could end careers. What I don't understand, Rob, is how you could speak so dismissively to any client, let alone your own mother. The lack of respect you just displayed is completely unacceptable in this firm. And in that moment, watching my son realize that his own arrogance and assumptions had just humiliated him in front of his boss, I finally understood that my months of protection had been completely wasted. The collision I'd been dreading had happened, and it was even worse than I'd imagined. The silence that followed Charles's revelation was deafening. Rob stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth slightly open, staring at me like I was some kind of apparition. His colleague looked between the three of us with fascination, clearly recognizing that he was witnessing something career-defining. VIP client? Rob finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Charles nodded, his expression still carrying that note of professional disappointment. Yes, Rob. Your mother has been one of our most valued clients for 15 years. We've been conducting her quarterly portfolio review for the past hour. Portfolio review? Rob repeated the words, like they were in a foreign language. Mrs. Miller manages a sophisticated investment portfolio with us, Charles explained, his tone growing colder as he processed what he'd just witnessed. We were discussing rebalancing strategies and emerging market opportunities. Rob's colleague cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should. No, please stay, Charles said firmly. I think Rob needs to understand the full scope of what just happened here. Rob was looking at me now with an expression of complete bewilderment. Mom, I don't understand. You asked me to help organize your finances because you said money was confusing. I never said money was confusing, Rob. You assumed it was confusing and started lecturing me about basic concepts I've understood for decades. Charles was studying both of us now with growing comprehension. Rob, did you not know about your mother's financial expertise? Financial expertise? Rob's voice cracked. She clips coupons. She drives a Honda that's 7 years old. She lives in the same house she's had forever. Living modestly and lacking financial resources are two very different things, Charles said pointedly. Your mother chooses to live simply. That's actually a sign of sophisticated wealth management, not financial struggle. Rob's colleague was now openly staring, clearly understanding that his junior associate had just made a massive professional and personal error. But the power of attorney documents, Rob stammered. You were going to sign them so I could help manage your finances properly. I was considering signing them, I said quietly. Not because I needed your help, but because I was tired of arguing with you about it. I thought maybe if I gave you some sense of control, you'd stop treating me like I was mentally incompetent. Charles's eyebrows shot up.
Power of attorney?
Rob, were you trying to take legal control of your mother's finances? The professional disapproval in Charles's voice was unmistakable now. I was trying to help her, Rob protested. She seemed confused about basic investment concepts. What basic investment concepts? Charles interrupted. Your mother identified the technology sector opportunity last quarter before most of our professional analysts did. She's consistently outperformed market averages through strategic stock selection and timing. Rob looked like someone had just told him. The sky was green. That's impossible. Charles walked to his desk and pulled out a portfolio statement. Rob, would you like to see your mother's quarterly performance report? Charles, I said softly. Maybe we should. No, Ruth. I think your son needs to understand exactly who he just dismissed as a confused elderly woman. Charles handed the document to Rob, whose hands were visibly shaking as he took it. I watched my son's eyes scan the numbers. The asset allocations, the year-over-year returns, the total portfolio value. 8 million? Rob whispered, looking up at me with shock. You have $8 million? Give or take, depending on market fluctuations, Charles confirmed. Your mother built that portfolio through careful research, strategic thinking, and sophisticated risk management. Rob's colleague made a small sound that might have been suppressed amazement. But how is this possible? Rob asked, still staring at the statement. You live so simply. You asked me to explain compound interest to you. I asked you to explain compound interest because I was trying to be polite while you lectured me about concepts I've been using successfully for over a decade. I said, finding my voice again. The truth was finally coming out, and I felt both relief and sadness washing over me. Rob, Charles said, his voice taking on the tone he probably used for serious client conversations. Your mother earned a 22% return on her technology positions last quarter. She understood market trends that most professional investors missed completely. 22%? Rob's voice was barely a whisper. While you were explaining basic diversification to her, she was successfully managing a portfolio diversified across 6 asset classes in 12 countries. Rob sank into the chair across from me like his legs had given out. I don't understand any of this, he said, looking at me with eyes that held confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been anger. Why would you hide this from me? Because I knew exactly what would happen if you found out, I said. Your arrogance was bad enough when you thought you were the family financial expert. What do you think it would have been like if you'd known your mother had millions of dollars? Charles was watching this exchange with growing understanding of the family dynamics at play. So all those Sunday dinners, Rob said slowly, when I was explaining investment strategies to you, You were explaining basic concepts to someone who'd been successfully implementing advanced versions of those strategies for years. And when I offered to get you a meeting with a junior advisor at Goldman Sachs, you were offering to get me a meeting at the firm where I'd already been a VIP client for 15 years. Rob put his head in his hands. Oh God, what have I done? Charles cleared his throat. Rob, I think we need to discuss the professional implications of what happened here today. Rob looked up with panic in his eyes. Professional implications. You just told a major VIP client to leave the building because you assumed she was confused and lost. You dismissed your own mother in front of a colleague, showing a complete lack of respect and professionalism. Rob's colleague was nodding slowly, clearly understanding the severity of the situation. Mr. Wilson, I didn't know. That's exactly the problem, Rob. You made assumptions about someone based on their age and appearance, and then you acted on those assumptions in a way that was both unprofessional and cruel. The weight of Rob's mistake was finally hitting him. Not only had he humiliated himself personally, but he'd done it in front of his boss while mistreating a major client. What does this mean for my job? Rob asked quietly. Charles looked at him for a long moment. It means we need to have a serious conversation about judgment, respect, and professional behavior. The way you spoke to your mother today is not how we treat clients at this firm, regardless of who they are. I could see my son's career flashing before his eyes. Mom, Rob said, turning to me with desperation in his voice. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was just trying to help. No, Rob. You weren't trying to help. You were trying to control me based on assumptions you made about my competence. But why didn't you just tell me the truth? Because I was protecting you from your own worst instincts. I knew that if you found out about my wealth, it would make your arrogance unbearable. Turns out I was right to be concerned. Charles was gathering papers from his desk, clearly preparing to end our meeting and deal with the Rob situation privately. Mrs. Miller, I think we've completed everything we needed to discuss today. Your portfolio adjustments will be implemented by tomorrow morning. Thank you, Charles. As always, it's been a pleasure working with you. I stood to leave, feeling strange about walking away from my son in this moment, but knowing that our conversation was far from over. Rob looked up at me with pleading eyes. Mom, what happens now? Now you deal with the consequences of your choices, Rob. You spent months treating me like I was incompetent while taking my financial help for granted. You brought power of attorney documents to dinner and tried to convince the family I needed supervision. You just told your own mother to leave your workplace because you assumed she was embarrassing you. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. Charles stepped forward. Rob, I'll need to see you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. We have a lot to discuss about professional conduct and client relations. As I walked toward the door, I heard Rob call after me. Mom, please. Can we talk about this at home? I paused in the doorway. Rob, for the past 4 months, you've made it clear that you think I'm too mentally feeble to understand basic financial concepts. You've lectured me about money while secretly planning to take legal control of my finances. You just publicly humiliated both of us because you assumed I was some confused old woman who didn't belong in a professional environment. The office was completely silent. I think we've talked enough for one day. As I walked through the Goldman Sachs lobby toward the exit, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The secret I'd been carrying for months was finally out. But at what cost? My phone started ringing before I even reached my car. Rob, calling frantically. I let it go to voicemail. Then Amanda called. Then Rob again. Then Tyler. By the time I got home, I had 14 missed calls and a string of increasingly panicked text messages. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. I'm sorry I didn't understand. Please don't be angry. Amanda wants to know if this changes anything about family finances. That last text told me everything I needed to know. Even in crisis, even after discovering that everything they thought they knew about me was wrong, they were already calculating how this affected their bottom line. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in Frank's old recliner, looking around at the modest home that had hidden my substantial wealth for so many years. Tomorrow, everything would be different. The family dynamic we'd built on their assumptions, and my secrecy was completely shattered. But for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The competent, intelligent, financially sophisticated woman I'd always been had finally been acknowledged by the people who mattered most. It just wasn't the people I'd expected. My phone rang again. This time it was Charles. Ruth, I wanted to call and apologize for what happened today. I had no idea. Charles, you have nothing to apologize for. You treated me exactly as you always have, with respect and professionalism. How are you handling all this? I looked around my quiet living room, thinking about the chaos that was probably happening at Rob and Amanda's house right now. I'm handling it just fine, I said. For the first time in months, people know exactly who they're dealing with. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Have your own children ever treated you like you were incompetent when you actually knew more than they did? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine.